All right, it's time for me to do my least favorite thing. Put out a ranking video so that all of you can do your favorite thing. Complain about it. Let's go. Hey, good morning. It's UncleLou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, UncleLou. And guess what? I'm live for you on LouTube today, so thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, hey, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. Did you know I post college football videos almost every single day of the year? That's right, and some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. It depends where I rank your team, right? If you like where I rank your team, this might be a watchable video according to you. If you don't like where I rank your team, it's an unwatchable video, and I'm an idiot who's never even seen a game. Let's get to the rankings. All right, I'm going to start at number 10, work my way down to number 1, and then at the end of the video, I'll put 11 through 25 up on the screen for you. As usual, I'm going to do my best to explain why I have teams 10 through 1 ranked where I do. I don't give an explanation because I'm trying to change anyone's mind or convince anyone that I'm right and every other ranking is wrong. It's just a complaint I hear about a lot of the other rankings. There's no explanation given behind the rankings, whether you're talking the AP to coaches. The playoff committee, to some degree, tries to explain some of their rankings sometimes. So what I do is I just tell you why I have a team ranked where I do and what I think might need to happen for them to move up or down. All right, coming in this week at number 10, Oregon. Oregon hasn't played a decent game, in my opinion, since week 2 on the road at Ohio State. Oregon has done nothing but disappoint me for the entirety of the season outside of that one game. Now, I can't just pretend that one game didn't happen. If you've been watching Ohio State play since that Oregon game, we know that Ohio State's a pretty good team. So no matter what happens the rest of the way for Oregon, that's going to remain a pretty good win, in my opinion, on the road in week 2 at Ohio State. And they only have the one loss, Oregon, although it was a bad loss, in my opinion, to a not very good Stanford team, but still, we're 8 weeks into the season. Oregon's a Power 5 program with just one loss and one really, really good win. I think the case can be made that they're a deserving top 10 team at this point, although I will be the first to say almost every single week that goes by, I think less and less of Oregon. This past week, they played a struggling UCLA team that's been up and down, and they were lucky to come away with a 3-point win, 34-31. Now, the win was on the road at UCLA. Oregon could have lost that game. They got an interception late to seal the deal. So, we'll give Oregon's defense some credit there for coming up and making a play late in the game to seal that win. But at the same time, UCLA they were in field goal range, basically. A field goal would have tied that game. And there's just been too many of these types of games, to me, for Oregon. If I'm a fan of a potential playoff team, I'm hoping Oregon gets in the playoffs. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think Oregon is a good enough football team right now to win a playoff game against any team that would get into the playoffs. There's another team that kind of falls into that category too that we'll talk about in a little bit. And, do I think Oregon is a terrible team? No. In fact, I think they're extremely talented, and that's why it makes it so frustrating to watch Oregon play. They should be running away with the Pac-12, and they're likely to win it. Some of the teams in the South are down. Southern Cal, Utah, they've already beat, like we mentioned, UCLA. The North isn't very good. Washington, nowhere is near as good as people thought they would be. There's not really anyone else in the North to challenge Oregon. We'll see. I do think Oregon needs to run the table and win the Pac-12 at 12-1 to have any shot at making the playoff, and they're probably going to need some help with some of these teams ranked in front of them losing. But I've got Oregon coming in this week at number 10 in the poll. This week, they host Colorado. At number 9, I've got Notre Dame back in my top 10 after a drubbing of Southern Cal this past weekend. They beat the Trojans 31-16 at home in South Bend. They host North Carolina this coming weekend, a chance for Notre Dame to get what would still be a pretty good win, although not as good of a win as it looked like maybe it would have been in the preseason when North Carolina was ranked in almost every single top 10 poll you could find. Notre Dame still only has the one loss. It is at home, but it's to a top 4 team in Cincinnati. Cincinnati, of course, still undefeated. Cincinnati beat them, I believe, 24-13, if I'm not mistaken, was the final score of that game. a few weeks ago. Notre Dame has had some close calls this year. Not the number of close calls that a team like Oregon has, but Notre Dame, if you go all the way back to week 1, they beat what at the time was a really bad Florida State team by 3 points, I believe, in overtime. They had a game that was way too close with, I think, Toledo. They've had some head-scratching games where you watch Notre Dame and it kind of looks like things aren't really going the way you wanted them to go. Their offense clearly hasn't been what it was last year. Their defense is playing okay. The win over Southern Cal, I still think Southern Cal is the most or one of the most talented teams in the Pac-12. Now, of course, they're without a coach. Their head coach was fired, Clay Helton, back in week 2. So Southern Cal has been a hard team to kind of gauge from week to week. The week after their coach was fired, they went out and got a big win. The next week, they never even got off the bus or showed up. This week in Notre Dame, they were just outclassed, losing 31-16. It's hard to figure out in my mind where really Notre Dame fits in. They've got some decent wins. They have lost to the best team that they played, though, like I mentioned, in Cincinnati. In terms of making the playoffs for Notre Dame, well, they're not making the playoffs. It's just that simple. With Notre Dame, they've got to go 12-0. I mean, that's just the way it is. They choose to remain an independent, meaning they don't have to play what would usually be a pretty good team in a 13th game, a conference championship game. And for that reason, I'm of the opinion that Notre Dame needs to go 12-0 in a regular season if they ever want to make a 4-team playoff. Now, when the playoff expands eventually to, I guess it's looking like probably 12 teams, I don't think that'll be the case. I think you could see an 11-1, even a 10-2 Notre Dame when you go to 12 teams could be getting into playoffs at that point. But as long as it remains 4 teams, I believe Notre Dame needs to go 12-0 in order to get in. So I don't think they'll get into the playoffs this year, but they could find themselves in a New Year's Six Bowl. And, of course, Notre Dame has not won a major postseason game since, 1990 or something like 0-10 in major postseason games in the last 31 years. With an average margin of defeat of 25 points. That includes playoff games, national title games, BCS title games, BCS bowls, and New Year's Six bowls. And if you can even include the one conference title game they played in last year during the pandemic season when they got absolutely destroyed by Clemson in the ACC title game. But you can't ignore 6-1 Notre Dame as much as some of us would like to. I've got them back in the top 10 this week. At number 9. And like I mentioned, they host the North Carolina Tar Heels this coming Saturday. Number 8, I've got Ole Miss. And I think I probably have Ole Miss a little higher than most other polls or rankings have them. I do think they're in the top 10 in either the coaches or their AP poll, or maybe even both. I don't really pay that close of attention to the AP or the coaches poll, to be honest. But I've got Ole Miss coming in this week at number 8. Yeah, they got beat by Alabama. Alabama's going to beat a lot of teams. 42-21 was the score in that one. And really, I know I gave Alabama a hard time about that game. The game really wasn't that close. I think the game was 35-0 at one point. Ended up being 42-21. Alabama kind of coasted in the fourth quarter of that game. But Ole Miss won again this past weekend, whipping up on LSU 31-17. This coming week, they play at Auburn. Things are starting to get interesting in both the SEC West and the Big Ten East, and we'll talk more about the Big Ten East here in just a few minutes. But sticking with the SEC West, since we're talking about Ole Miss here, they still just have the one loss, both overall and obviously within the SEC, that loss coming to Alabama. Alabama's got one loss, so those two teams are tied for first in the SEC West. Alabama, of course, with the tiebreaker because they beat Ole Miss. Well, Auburn has 2 losses, but only one of those losses is an SEC loss, a loss at home to Georgia a few weeks ago. So Auburn is actually tied for the lead in the SEC West as well. So you've got basically a 3-way race right now for the SEC West champion between Alabama, Ole Miss, and Auburn. Ole Miss and Auburn play this week at Auburn. So this game here is going to go a long way in determining both what happens within the SEC West and where Auburn and Ole Miss individually end up both in the postseason and whether or not they're potentially playing in the SEC title game the first weekend in December. Auburn would need to win this game and then, of course, beat Alabama during the last game of the season, the Iron Bowl. Ole Miss has already had their shot at Alabama, didn't come through. Now, if Ole Miss can win this game and then Auburn beats Alabama, Ole Miss becomes SEC West champion, right? Assuming Ole Miss would win out. Ole Miss would have to beat Auburn and then hope that Auburn beats Alabama in the Iron Bowl. That would leave Ole Miss as the only one-loss team in the SEC West. So these scenarios aren't far-fetched. I don't think Alabama has won in Auburn since 2015. So this is a big game for Ole Miss. That's the point I'm getting at here. You can think what you want about Ole Miss or about Auburn, but the reality is we're in week 8, week 9, whatever it is. We're basically 2/3 of the way through the regular season, and both of these teams, Auburn and Ole Miss, only have one SEC loss. So not only are they alive mathematically, but realistically, I think they still have a shot to win the West. Clearly, Alabama is the favorite, but Alabama is out of do-overs. If they lose another game, that's it for them, both for winning the SEC West and making a potential playoff. They're not putting a 2-loss Alabama team in that didn't even make the conference title game. It just won't happen. So we'll see. But I do think Ole Miss is a good team. They're definitely a fun team to watch. And when the offense is clicking, it might be the best offense in all of college football. And there are some good ones. Oklahoma, when Caleb Williams is playing well, looks really good. Ohio State has looked really good on offense the last couple of weeks. Alabama, when they're clicking, can look really good offensively. I think Matt Corral's the best quarterback in college football this season. In my mind, he's the front runner for the Heisman at this point in the season. I'm not giving the Heisman away this week, so we'll see what happens over the last month of the season, the month of November. The quote-unquote Heisman moments. Could Matt Corral have one of those type of moments this weekend coming up against a pretty good Auburn team on the road at Auburn? He could. What he can't do is lose this game. I don't think Matt Corral can win the Heisman if Ole Miss loses what would basically be their 2 biggest games of the year, Alabama and Auburn. Already lost to Alabama. I think this is an interesting game. I think it's a good game. Auburn's a tough place to play. We'll see how Ole Miss, Matt Corral, and that lane kicking offense can handle the crowd noise. But I've got Ole Miss coming in this week at number 8. All right, at number 7 and number 6, I'm going to put both of these up at the same time. I don't care what order you want to put these in. This is Michigan State and Michigan. I've got Michigan State at 7, Michigan at 6. You can flip them around really any way you want. Doesn't matter to me. We'll start with Michigan State, though. They were on a bye this past week. They play Michigan this week. So this is why it doesn't matter what order or really where within the top 10 you have Michigan or Michigan State. They play this week. The winner of that game clearly is going to be ranked somewhere within the top 6, in my opinion. And the loser is going to be sort of hovering around the 10-ish spot, depending on the outcome of the game. If a team were to get blown out, maybe they drop back to 11, 12, or 13. But if it's a close game, both teams are likely to remain within the top 10, so we'll see. But starting off with Michigan State, like I said, Kenneth Walker, probably the best running back so far during the course of the season. You have Bijan Robinson at Texas. You've got Travion Henderson at Ohio State. Those are the 3 big names, really, that you hear when you look at numbers anyway. Travion Henderson doesn't have the yardage that the other 2 guys have, but he also doesn't get the number of carries. He's an interesting running back to watch, too. I think this is going to be a great game this week, a rivalry game, an in-state rivalry game, and everything's still on the line for both of these teams, Michigan State and Michigan. They're both undefeated, right? Michigan State 7-0, Michigan 7-0. Winner of this game has a big leg up in the Big Ten East. Now, both of these teams still have to play Penn State and Ohio State. The Big Ten East is a complete mess. Penn State's got the loss within the conference already, losing to Iowa a couple of weeks ago and then losing to Illinois. But I still think Penn State is a dangerous team, dangerous enough to knock off one of these other 3 teams, Michigan, Michigan State, or Ohio State. Ohio State is the one that's in the biggest danger because they already have the 1 loss back in week 2 at home to Oregon. So again, if they suffer even 1 Big Ten loss, that would be their 2nd loss of the season, probably knocking them out of a playoff. Michigan and Michigan State, it'll be interesting to see if they could absorb a loss. The loser of this game could go on to beat Ohio State and potentially still win the Big Ten East. So nothing that happens this weekend between Michigan State, Michigan, and then, of course, Ohio State, Penn State also play this weekend. Nothing that happens is going to wrap up or determine the Big Ten East, but we'll know a lot more about the Big Ten East after these games are played this weekend. When you look over at Michigan, it's hard for me to go all in on Michigan. I have been so high on Michigan several times on this channel over the last 5 or 6 years, and every single time they've made me look like a fool, and it's kind of the once bitten, twice shy deal with Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. I'm scared to put my full faith and trust in this Michigan team. I will admit, they look as good right now as I've seen them look under Jim Harbaugh. I think they're playing really well. They beat Northwestern this past week, 33-7. Northwestern not as good as they have been in some previous years, but still not a complete pushover. And, of course, this week they play on the road at number 8, Michigan State, a huge game, both nationally, within the Big Ten, and in particular within the Big Ten East. We'll see how it plays out. But I've got Michigan State this week at 7 and Michigan at 6. All right, coming into the top 5 now, and I'm going to be honest with you, 5 through 4 is hard for me to do. I do think these are the teams that should be 5 to 2. The order I'm not very convinced on. I went back and forth with several of these teams before I decided on this final order from 5 to 2. Clearly, Georgia is number 1. They're number 1 in every ranking and every poll you look at, and they deserve to be number 1 when you look at what they've done and how they've done it. 2 through 5 is the real debate in my mind within the top 10. I'll just reveal the whole thing now and instead of making you wait one team at a time. But I've got Oklahoma at 5, Alabama at 4, Ohio State at 3, Cincinnati at 2, and Georgia at 1. Now, I use a combination of factors when I go to rank these teams. It's kind of a combination of where I think a team deserves to be ranked versus what I think they've earned to be ranked, right? So we'll start with Oklahoma. They were in everyone's preseason top 4. A lot of people picked Oklahoma to win the national title. A lot of people picked Oklahoma to play in the national title game. They're undefeated. They're a Power 5 team. They've got some wins over a couple of quality opponents. But when you watch Oklahoma play, it just looks like they are constantly 1 week away from a loss. They have not been the dominant team, even offensively, for the majority of the year that we're used to seeing a Lincoln Riley-led Oklahoma team be. You take this most recent game against Kansas where they did win 35-23. They were held scoreless in the first half. Now, this is just completely unheard of for a Lincoln Riley Oklahoma team. If you want to talk about their defense this year, fine. That's been bad for years and years. No one is surprised by that. But they've already benched their opening day starting quarterback and Heisman favorite Spencer Rattler. They're now going with the backup Caleb Williams. And obviously, he has looked better most of the time that he's played than Spencer Rattler. That wasn't the case in the first half against Kansas, though. Oklahoma looked really, really bad, and this isn't the first time. They were down huge to Texas, came back and won. They were down huge to, who was the other team they were trailing to? I can't remember now. But anyway, the point is they have not looked like a complete team or a dominant team all year long. They just haven't. I mentioned this about Oregon, and I'm going to say it about Oklahoma. A fan of any team that has any hopes of making the playoffs, you want Oregon or Oklahoma to get in. If you're an Alabama fan and you think you're making the playoffs, you want Oregon and Oklahoma to get in. If you're an Ohio State fan and you're thinking you're going to make the playoffs, you want Oregon and Oklahoma to get in. Same for Cincinnati, same for Georgia, Michigan, Michigan State, on down the list. Any team still alive for the playoff, you are crossing your fingers that your team gets in and Oklahoma and Oregon get in, because playing in Oklahoma or in Oregon in the playoffs, at least in the current format, the 4-team format we have now, drawing Oklahoma or Oregon in the first round of a playoffs is the closest thing to a bye that we have. Neither of these teams are going to win a playoff game playing the kind of football that I've been watching them play for the last month. Again, this isn't an overreaction to one game by Oklahoma against Kansas or one game by Oregon against UCLA. I have watched both of these teams play the majority of their games this year. Neither team has really impressed me over the last month, with the exception maybe the second half Oklahoma versus Texas. Outside of that, these two teams have been disappointing. Now, their records and the fact that they're name brand schools and they're in Power 5 conferences are going to give them a shot to make the playoffs if they run the table and win their conference title games. But like I said, every other team that has any shot of making the playoffs is crossing their fingers that Oklahoma and or Oregon get in, and every team would love to play them in the first round. And I don't think there's anybody watching college football right now that thinks Oklahoma or Oregon would have any chance to win a first-round playoff game unless somehow they got matched up against each other. But I've got Oklahoma at number 5. They beat Kansas 35-23. This week they host Texas Tech. At number 4, I've got Alabama. And again, there's arguments to make for Alabama. Any spot, 5, 4, 3, or 2. So if you don't have to tell me you think Alabama should be 3 or 2. I agree. There's plenty of reason to put Alabama 3 or 2. Why do I have them 4 instead of 5 or 3? Well, when it comes to putting them ahead of Oklahoma, I just think they're better. Results do matter, and Oklahoma's undefeated, and Alabama has a loss to a 2-loss Texas A&M team. I get that. And I did give that some consideration. In fact, that's probably the most important single data point you can look at when ranking teams is what's their record. Winning is better than losing. Beating any team is better than losing to any team. So these Ohio State fans running around trying to convince people that losing to Oregon in week 2 is somehow better than Cincinnati beating Navy by 7. No, it's not. Winning against anyone is better than losing against anyone. And so Oklahoma has won all their games. And at the end of the day, if Oklahoma does that every single week, they'll be 15-0 and national champions, and it won't matter what I'm saying now. But if you've watched Alabama and Oklahoma play over the last month of college football, who would you bet $1 on in that game in a neutral site right now? I'd put it on Alabama. I also think Alabama has played a tougher schedule and has some better wins. Alabama has an impressive win against Ole Miss, for example, and they've got opportunities for more impressive wins down the road. They still play Auburn at the end of the season and potentially a UGA and an SEC title game. So Alabama's going to have chances for more big wins too. Oklahoma's got some tough tests coming up too. I think they play Baylor, Oklahoma State. Who else is it they play? Is it Iowa State? Anyway, so they've got some tough games coming up too. And to be honest with you, the Oklahoma team that I've been watching over the last month is not going to finish the regular season undefeated. They better figure something out, and they better figure it out in a hurry. With Alabama, same kind of thing. I think they're extremely talented, but if you watched like the game last week, for example, against Tennessee, there's not really any reason Alabama should only be leading Tennessee 21-14 at halftime. And if you watch the game, it's not just about the scoreboard. It's about the way Alabama played. Alabama at one point got a false start on a delay of game on 1st and 10 coming out of a TV timeout. Well, I don't know how that happens anywhere. I definitely don't know how that happens at a Nick Saban coached Alabama team. You had basically 2 or 3 minutes to get the play called, get that information to your quarterback, get it to the team, get lined up to play. If you've ever been to a game, you know what it's like during a TV timeout. The players come over to a sideline for a few minutes, talk to the coaches. Then they're basically just standing on the field, waiting on the official on the sideline to let everybody know they're back from commercial so you can snap the ball. How do you get a delay of game on 1st and 10 coming out of a TV timeout? And it didn't just happen once. It happened twice. Now, they didn't get a delay of game the second time because Nick Saban used a timeout with 1 second left on the play clock. Turnovers. Alabama had a punt blocked. It's just there's things going on with Alabama this season that you just don't normally see. Go back to the Florida game. They got bullied. Alabama got absolutely bullied by Florida on the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Alabama won the first quarter of that game and lost the next 3. Now, the final score gave Alabama the win, and that's all that matters in the end. But Florida was better than Alabama for 3 quarters of that game and absolutely dominated them on the line of scrimmage. When's the last time you really could say that about any Alabama team? Dropped passes. If it wasn't for the transfer portal, Alabama might have 2 or 3 losses right now at this point in the season. Jameis Williams or whatever it is that they got from Ohio State in the transfer portal is their best receiver. Henry Toto is leading the team in tackles, and he's not even that good. He's not even that good. There's one superstar in Alabama's defense, and it's Will Anderson, what is he, outside linebacker, whatever he is. When you watch Alabama play, they're clearly a really good team, and they're clearly a supremely talented team, maybe the most talented team in America. But it's just not coming together for whatever reason. Alabama just looks a little out of sync to me. That's one of the reasons I've got them at 4 and not 3. So I gave you the reasons why I've got Bama ahead of Oklahoma. Those are some of the reasons why I've got them behind the number 3 team, Ohio State. Going back to watching just the last month of the season. Yes, Ohio State did lose at home to Oregon. Which is a better or worse loss? Ohio State at home to Oregon or Alabama on the road at Texas A&M? I think those losses are probably about the same. So you've got similar records here from similar Power 5 teams. Now, I almost put Alabama ahead of Ohio State for quality wins. In other words, Ohio State doesn't have any. Ohio State's best win, in my opinion, this year is way back in week 1, a 14-point win against an average, at best, Minnesota team. Now, the eye test, when you just watch Ohio State play, the last 2 or 3 weeks in particular, They look absolutely amazing on offense. The quarterback is starting to hit his stride, C.J. Stroud. I talked about Travion Henderson earlier in the video. He's absolutely amazing and one of the funnest players to watch in all of college football. And they've got probably the best group of starting wide receivers in college football. I've still got a lot of questions about Ohio State's defense. I've also got questions about C.J. Stroud and the offense against a quality defensive opponent. They've only played one ranked team, Ohio State, and they got beat. They lost to Oregon back in week 2. However, when I watch these two teams play, Ohio State today looks a little better than Bama. They've got similar records and resumes, so that's why I've got Ohio State at 3 and Bama at 4. Again, if you want to argue that Bama should be 3, I have no problem with that. Hell, you could argue Bama should be 2. I wouldn't have a problem with that either. At number 2, I've got Cincinnati. Winning matters, okay? Again, beating anybody is better than losing to anybody. That's just the facts. That's just reality. And if you watch Cincinnati play, they are a legitimately good team. Yes, they had their worst game of the season this past week against Navy. And it's not a good Navy team. I think Navy is 1-6 now. Not a good Navy team. Cincinnati really struggled. They came out of the gate super slow, and they've done that a couple of times this season. But I've watched enough Cincinnati games to know that they're a legitimately good team. Are they the second best team in America? That's debatable. That I'm not so sure about. I think Ohio State could give Cincinnati trouble. Alabama could give Cincinnati trouble. I do think Cincinnati right now would probably beat Oklahoma. I'm still on the fence with a Michigan and Michigan State. I feel like I need to see them do a little bit more. Cincinnati versus Ole Miss, I think, would be a good game. I know Cincinnati would beat Notre Dame. They already did it on the road in South Bend. And I think Cincinnati would beat Oregon. So of the top 10 teams, I'm pretty confident in Cincinnati to beat 6 of them. So there's debate there for Cincinnati. I get that their schedule isn't really even close, especially when you look at the end of the season, to any of these other teams in the top 10 because of the conference they play in. Now, Cincinnati's got a better win. Cincinnati's win at Notre Dame is better than any win Ohio State has. It's better than any win Alabama has. It's better than any win Oklahoma has. Might be better than any win Georgia has when you just look at the quality of the opponent they beat. Oregon and Cincinnati probably have the 2 best wins of all the top 10 teams, right? And that has to mean something. Cincinnati also has a game coming up against SMU. And again, what me and you think about SMU is irrelevant. SMU is 7-0 or 8-0, whatever they are. They're ranked in every single poll and ranking. They're going to be ranked in the playoff committee poll when it comes out. A week from today, actually, is when the first playoff ranking comes out. Cincinnati's going to have an opportunity to beat an undefeated SMU team, not once, but twice, because they're in the same conference. So they could play SMU here. They play SMU in a few weeks. SMU is going to be a top 15 team. So, again, it doesn't matter what me and you think about SMU. If Cincinnati beats SMU in a few weeks and SMU is undefeated, the committee is going to look at that as a quality win. So they're going to have the Notre Dame win. They're going to have the SMU win, assuming they win it. And then they could potentially play a one-loss SMU team, with SMU's only loss being to Cincinnati. Cincinnati could play them again in that conference title game and get another quality win. This is definitely the closest we have ever come and may ever come to a group of 5 team making the 4-team playoff. We're fixing to get ready to go to 12 playoff teams here in another couple of years, and when that happens, you'll most likely see a group of 5 team or 2 in the playoffs almost every single year. This may be the group of 5's only legitimate shot to get a team into the 4-team playoff structure that we've been operating under since 2014. But Cincinnati, like I mentioned, struggled this week, but came out on top on the road against a bad Navy team, 27-20. They play at another 1-win team this coming week, Tulane. Tulane's best game of the season was a loss to Oklahoma, where really they outplayed Oklahoma for the entire game. It should have won, but we've talked enough about Oklahoma. And, of course, number 1 in my top 10 ranking. And number one in every single ranking you look at is Georgia. They had every single first place vote in the AP poll this week. They were on a bye week this past weekend ahead of the big showdown with Florida, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, coming up this weekend in Jacksonville, a neutral site game played down there every single year, the last Saturday of October. Florida's coming off a humiliating loss to LSU a couple of weeks ago, where LSU's the worst rushing team in the SEC statistically, and they ran for 310 yards on Florida. Georgia, coming off this bye week, is going to be the healthiest it has been all year long. All signs are pointing towards JT Daniels not only playing, but possibly starting. He's been getting the first team reps at practice now for 2 days in a row. We'll see what happens when they tee it up on Saturday. Several of the wide receivers are coming back for this game. Of course, Kyrus Jackson, Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy St. Jack, Jermaine Burton. So Georgia starting to get healthy here. This is setting up to be a bad week for Florida. They in the last week already, they have lost their top 2 commitments for the 2022 class. But their top 2 recruits have decommitted, and now they're just fixing to get absolutely obliterated by the best team in America, the number 1 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. But I don't feel like I need to explain why I have Georgia number 1. Like I said, literally every single ranking and poll on earth has Georgia number 1. They've got 3 quality wins in a row over Arkansas, Auburn, and Kentucky. They've got to win back in week 1 over Clemson, which clearly doesn't look anywhere near as good today as it did back then. They've got this game coming up against Florida, and then they've got 4 games left in the regular season. They get Missouri at home, on the road at Tennessee, Charleston Southern at home, and then on the road at Georgia Tech. And then, of course, a date in Atlanta for the SEC title game against either Alabama, Ole Miss, or Auburn. That's Georgia's remaining schedule. So it looks like a 12-0 regular season for Georgia, and we'll see what type of matchup they get in the SEC title game, but I've got them ranked number 1 this week. So there you go. That's the top 10 for this week. Be sure and let me know where I'm wrong, and I'm going to go ahead and put up 11 through 25 right now. Have a good morning.